So I appreciate the opportunity to spend this time with you, and I trust that what I share with you, you'll feel a similar appreciation. And I'll skip the early morning references, and based on the wisdom of my kids, I also skip the humor. I always seem to skew the punchline in a joke. So I avoid that kind of thing. But you'll hear in a moment why my need is to get started so quickly. I was first introduced to this book, Claiming Your Place at the Fire, Living the Second Half of Your Life on Purpose. This is by David Shapiro and Richard Leider. Now, many of you may not think of yourself as being in the second half of your life, but if you're a woman and you are 40, you're launching into the second half of your life. If you're a gentleman and you are 38, you are doing the same thing. So we're all kind of in this time frame together. But I was introduced to this book by my pastor, Jim Doherty. He had asked me if I would consider teaching a class on transitions. And as the session developed in my mind, I have to tell you, it became 6 weekly sessions, and I've got 25 minutes. So if I move quickly, you'll understand why. Because my intention today is to provide both some food for thought and also an experience that you can integrate into your own transition process. I'll give you a brief overview of how I'm going to approach this. I'll provide an overview of the book, and then we'll go through kind of a vicarious little process, and hopefully you'll get the feel for what hopes and dreams are all about. Now, Leider and Shapiro use the metaphor of fire in describing lives, and I'll quote, "There comes a time when the flames of our lives have settled into a comfortable glow. The fire is steady, burning warmly, and in no danger of going out anytime soon. There's plenty of fuel to add to it, but no rush to do so. A bank of coals lies at the base of the fire, white hot and powerful. The fire has been well tended and now ready to give back great heat and light for some time to come." And they've written this book for people who are ready to stoke that wisdom that they've gained in the first half of their life to burn more brightly in the second. Now, all of you are part of that well-tended fire. You've all gained wisdom in the first part of your lives, but you're here this morning perhaps because questions such as, who am I? Where do I really belong? What do I really care about? What's my purpose? Maybe you're drawn to those questions, and perhaps you sensed a calling, but you don't know how to heed it. Now, an earlier book by the same authors developed a definition of the good life, and they included 4 components: people, place, work, and purpose. And as the authors reflected on the second half of life, they realized that folks needed to address those same questions periodically through their lives. Now, using that metaphor of fire, you'll hear it throughout my presentation, and I note that the 4 flames that they refer are not unique to them, but how they've woven them together to address transition is. Now, others have written about similar concepts, and I'm going to reference 2 of them today. Tuesdays with Morrie by Mitch Albom, and Man is Not Alone by Abraham Heschel, who's a philosopher and a theologian of the 20th century. And so we begin. The first flame is that of identity, and we address that flame by recalling our story. And in doing so, we address the principle of wisdom, and we respond to the question, who am I? Now, elders teach by story all the time, but it isn't simply recalling stories of the good old days. Rather, it's the ability to touch lives and lived experiences of others through their own experience in a manner that brings it alive in the present, but through the past. For example, the value of storytelling is as old as humanity itself. In early biblical times, Jesus taught almost exclusively through parable and story. And in the book Tuesdays with Morrie, Morrie describes the value of storytelling as primarily an opportunity to provide some guidance or inspiration, first to oneself and then to the one being told, then offering a perspective that connects our own experience to something more universal. Now, Heschel writes, I love the way he writes, so I have to dip into him periodically. But Heschel writes, the riches of a soul are stored up in its memory. Recollection is a holy act. We sanctify the present by remembering the past. Now, we've all heard stories from our parents and our grandparents, stories of their childhood, of lessons they've learned, and perhaps sometimes it was to remind us about how good we had it, or that we have it now compared to them. But other times it was to teach us values of commitment and caring and appreciation, values that ultimately became our own. Now, the authors believe that it's very difficult to live on purpose in the second half of your life unless we contemplate the big picture. And that is, unless we recall the first half of our life and reflect upon who we were and how that affects who we are in this new phase. And as we move to the second half of life, we inevitably confront the question, well, where in the world do I belong? And so we come to the flame of community, and that's addressing the principle of intimacy. Now, the hunger for a place where we belong is among the most deepest of our emotions. But a real sense of belonging to a place involves more than just physical comfort. A sense that we're seen by others, that our contributions matter, that we're making a difference in other people's lives. These play an even more vital role in helping us feel that we're in the world where we really belong. So we can conclude that place is not just a physical environment, but it's an emotional and an intellectual one as well. So where we are refers to the place in our hearts and in our minds, as well as our location on the planet. Now, over time, I, as perhaps many of you, have envisioned myself in a variety of places. But I never would have envisioned myself speaking to a group such as you in a venue such as this. 5 years ago, excuse me, early morning chatting is a lot of talk. And then you unexpectedly get ice, and what do you do with the ice in your mouth? Excuse me. And I used up 30 seconds, darn. Over time, I perhaps, as many of you, have envisioned myself in a variety of places, as I mentioned. But 5 years ago, I was diagnosed with cancer. Fortunately, it was caught in the early stages, but nevertheless, it was nasty enough that over the course of that summer, anytime I went outside, I needed to wear a hat, not to protect my hair from sun damage, but to keep my bald head from burning. So initially, going through a variety of emotions, I found myself determined to learn everything I could about myself. And in retrospect, I had actually used the process that the authors had referred to. I was determined not to settle for just being a survivor. I was determined to be a cancer thriver. I am a woman of faith, and as I reviewed my life and the various paths that led me to that particular point, I concluded that God wasn't through with me yet. So I've passed my 5 years. I've been written off by my surgeon, by my oncologist, and I can't wait to see what happens in the next turn of my life. Thank you. Now, referring again to Morrie in Tuesdays with Morrie, he tells Mitch, Aging is not just decay, you know, it's growth. It's more than the negative that you're going to die. It's also the positive that you understand you're going to die and that you live a better life because of it. And I think that's what happened to me. But perhaps no challenge is greater for people in the second half of their life than to find something meaningful and valuable to do with their gifts. And this brings us to the third flame, which is that of passion, a renewing of our calling, and with the principle of caring. By the time most of us reach the second half of our life, we're quite experienced with the world of work. We know what it means to have a job, fulfill our responsibilities, very capably and quite creatively. But by the time we meet this middle session of our life, just as many of us have a stronger than ever before feeling to express ourselves more fully with our work. So you see, a vital part of aging is passion, doing what we really care about. Now, Leider and Shapiro believe that the second half of life represents the very first time we have to redefine ourselves and live in a manner of our own choosing. And so that means it's up to us to figure out what it is that we care about. Now, the authors also make a connection between the renewed sense of calling and a renewed sense of hope. But some of us may ask, how on earth do you keep hope alive when so much of what we've hoped for, success at work, increased monetary rewards, improved health, family relations, when so much of what we had hoped for may not appear to be available to us? Well, the answer is somewhat paradoxical. It's a forward-looking as a kind of backward-looking. And what I mean by that is that our hope is not just for the future, but rather it's also a kind of hope for the past, that the past we've lived has had some meaning and it's been for something, and that we've made a difference in someone's life, not just our own. We can't change what the past has been, but we can change the future based on our path. So hope is most powerfully stimulated by taking part in something that will bear fruit in the lives of others. And this brings us to our fourth flame, the flame of meaning, reclaiming our purpose, asking the question, what is my legacy? And this with the principle of meaning. Now, the authors tell us that during profound transitions, people go higher and they go deeper in their life experience. They go higher in their appreciation for nature and the beauty and interconnectedness of life. And they go deeper in renewing their relationship with God. I have a beautiful garden and a labyrinth. And these are places that I go to when I want to re-experience that connectedness with nature and all of life. And it's also where I went during my chemo recovery, and it's where I continue to go for conversation and guidance. Now, the authors conclude we cannot fully name our purpose until we know ourselves, our spiritual nature, what we stand for, our emotional core. And I close with a favorite quote, again from Heschel. The true aspiration is not that, excuse me, I heard the car and I lost my moment. The true aspiration is not that self and all that is contained in it may last, but all that self stands for may last. So how do we go about figuring out what we really care about, and how do we come face to face with our purpose? Now, during the last 3 years of my work in the school district, I facilitated a multidisciplinary team of specialists who, when a school's resources had been exhausted for a given educational special ed kid, the educational needs had been exhausted, they would ask for a review team to come in and kind of figure out where do we go from here. And one of the processes that I used is what I call hopes and dreams. Now, if you think about from middle school through high school, a student who has perhaps literally worn out his welcome at school, exhausted, and it's not always behavior, please know that, but exhausted the skill set of the school or the resources that they have available for them. You have anxious parents, you have anxious kids, and sometimes you have anxious community people. So I would convene a team that would include anybody who had a stake in this kid. It could be a parent, a grandparent, a step-parent, a foster parent. It could be the parole officer. It could be someone from church. It could be a CASA volunteer. So, and it would usually involve a specialist in his or her particular disability and school personnel. And what we would do is, of course, having studied the file first, I had a sense of what this student's issues were and what his or her needs were. And I would gather the folks together, and using a chart paper and colored pens, I would talk about this process that we were going to use. And we were going to start with hopes and dreams. And I have to tell you that too often there were blank faces in that group. And I would ask, what are your hopes and dreams for John or Julie or whomever? And there would be a blank stare. So I always had a few in my bag that I was ready to pull out. If I knew that there was enough time that the student had a chance to graduate, I would write down, I hope John graduates from high school. If I knew that wasn't an option, I would indicate, I hope John gets his GED. And then that would begin to open up folks' thinking in terms of the student. All the while I am observing the student as closely as I can, certainly not staring, but you learn to have eyes around the back of your head and through your peripheral vision. And because we were starting with positive things, hopes and dreams, pretty soon the student's sitting up taller, head comes up, beginning to make eye contact. Then we move to strengths and interests. And oftentimes, again, blank faces. But because I'd been observing that student, I could say, well, I know that this is probably the last place that John wants to be. But he's sitting in this group. He's sitting up tall. He's making eye contact with me. And I really appreciate it. That is a strength. And so then we begin to hear. And the teachers, all they had to do was be in one meeting with me, and they knew they'd better come to that meeting with some positive things to say about the student. Then we would get to the fears and nightmares. But by now we'd already developed a sense of safety. And fears and nightmares included any number of things. In one case, I had one parent who just said, I'm afraid Julie's going to get pregnant. Now Julie, this was at the beginning of the Gothic look, and so when Julie came to the meeting, she had her black lipstick, her black hair, her black fingernails, and her black clothes, and a few extra adornments. But she did make eye contact with me, and she sat up straight. And when Mom said, I'm afraid Julie's going to get pregnant, Julie was most indignant and said, Mom, do you think I'm that stupid? We don't even mess around. And Mom said, but Julie, your friends look. She says, Mom, have you ever told me you don't judge a book by its cover? And it was the first time that I could see in that meeting some mutual respect and, maybe I have been judging you wrong. And then we moved to the question, how can we actualize the hopes and dreams, capitalizing on the strengths and interests, avoiding the fears and nightmares? What goals do we need to write? And then we'd get to the goal writing, and then what goes along with goals, what kinds of resources, timelines, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to make this kind of a personal experience for you today, and I do have 5 more minutes, so I'm going to use them. I would like each of you to think about a hope and dream for yourself. So just take a moment to give words to this nebulous thought. And you've all got paper on the table, so jot it down. Just take a moment to put those words on paper. The paper's coming around. I think this side. Now, at your comfort level, share this hope and dream with your table. At your comfort level. I don't hear anything. Come on, you're not that uncomfortable. Now, if you're at a table by yourself, don't hesitate to join another group. Now, if I were eavesdropping at your table, my guess would be that I hear things about career, that I may hear things about health, I may hear things about relationships, and it may be as simple as by the time I get the kids out the door with all their homework and everybody's got the right clothes on and they're making the bus or they're in the car soon enough so we can move on, my adrenaline level is pumping so hard that by the time I get to work, I'm ready to bite somebody's head off. It could be even that. And if that's the case, you might think about going to a music store and buying yourself a CD. Think about what kind of music you like. And if you like the real upbeat kind, there are some wonderful contemporary Christian music that you can transfer that adrenaline tension into adrenaline praise. And by the time you get to work, you'll feel great. If you need quieter music to bring you down, that can happen too. So now let's think about a strength or an interest that you might have. And jot that down. The fact that you could get up and be here on time is an interest and a strength right there. So you have to think of something else. And then share that with your table also. Now, if I were eavesdropping on your particular table, I would probably hear things like self-starter. I have a good skill set based on my job and what I do. I have a passion for reading, sports, watching TV, whatever it is. I am curious. I have an education. I have a wonderful partner. I have whatever. You can go on and on. These are strengths and interests. And I'm not going to take you through everything because time I have used it up. But the next thing that you would want to do is ask yourself, what are my fears and nightmares? And at some point, you really have to be honest with yourself. Maybe it's a relationship fear. Maybe it's fear that you're getting bored in your job and you need to think of ways to stimulate yourself and what you're doing. And then you move on to that question that I would ask the group when I was facilitating. How do I make my hopes and dreams a reality, capitalizing on my strengths and interests, avoiding my fears and nightmares? What do I have to do? And maybe you've got 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 goals, and maybe you choose one to work on. I've used this process with nonprofit boards, with for-profit groups, with individuals, and with small groups. So I know it works, and I even use it for myself. I don't have to go through the writing process because I've done it enough times. I just think it through. But on occasion, I jot something down just to make sure it's that next level of commitment that I am going to do something about it. So I trust that the time that you've given me today has been worth it for you. And I thank you for being such gracious listeners and such wonderful participants. So if you have any questions, I'll respond to them with... Yes.
Tell me again the name of the book that you're using as a guide.
Oh, sure. It is Claiming Your Place at the Fire, Living the Second Half of Your Life on Purpose by Leider and Shapiro, Leider.
Any other questions? Oh, there's one in the back.
Just wondering, most of the transitions that you seem to be speaking of were sort of general transitions or expansion into a different aspect of what you've been doing professionally in the first half. Do you find folks making drastic transitions, being successful at it, or is that something that usually you should stay away from? Changing career field or whatever.
The question has to do with the extent of the transition, whether it's a gentle transition or should you take the leap and make a drastic transition. I think only the individual can make that determination of whether he or she should, but people have made drastic transitions and done it successfully, but each person defines that success in a different way. If you're only looking for a monetary success or a title success, I think you had a speaker 1 or 2 sessions ago who talked about how sometimes the biggest favor that can happen to you is to lose your job. And it's hard when someone else facilitates that. That's one thing. It's harder for you to do it for yourself. But if you go through the process and determine that, it's kind of like learning how to swim. If you only stay in shallow water, you'll never know. But if you jump in over your head, you'll go down, but you'll surface. And so you have to remember that there is a process and there's time that's required to experience that. But if you give it good thought, you'll do fine.